Clint Eastwood had just done something no one expected of a man known for squints and six-shooters. He'd won Best Picture and Best Director for Unforgiven, the bleakest Western of his career. What he chose next was a thriller about an aging Secret Service agent haunted by the one day he couldn't undo. That choice pulled together a screenwriter who nearly quit the business, a German director coming off a flop, a villain who'd terrify a generation, and the first film the U.S. Secret Service ever fully cooperated with. Here are 24 secrets behind In the Line of Fire. Number 1. The spec script that saved a life. By the start of the 1990s, Jeff McGuire was a writer who'd spent close to a decade chasing a Hollywood career that refused to arrive. Behind on rent, he was already boxing up his apartment to leave Los Angeles for good. His last idea, a story about a guilt-ridden Secret Service agent hunting a would-be presidential assassin. Castle Rock bought the finished screenplay in under 2 days for $1.4 million, one of the largest spec sales anyone in town could remember. McGuire later admitted that to afford a celebration dinner, he and his wife returned a blouse he'd just bought her, since the sale money hadn't reached his account yet. Less than a year later, he was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay. Number 2. The Real Agent Who Haunted Clint. I'll live with that to my grave. Those were the words of Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who threw himself onto JFK's moving limousine in Dallas trying to shield the president. He said it on 60 Minutes more than a decade later, his composure finally cracking under the belief that a faster reaction might have changed history. Frank Horrigan, Eastwood's character, was shaped loosely around Hill, with the film going further by imagining Horrigan as the agent who actually rode in the Kennedy motorcade and failed to stop the shot, invented history that gave the thriller a hero defined by a 30-year-old failure he could never set down. Eastwood drew far more on that remorse than on any tactical briefing. Number 3. A Carousel of Almost Wants. Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Sean Connery, James Caan, Tommy Lee Jones, and Val Kilmer were all attached or offered the role at various points, and Tom Selleck had even developed it as a TV project years earlier. The part drifted from studio to studio and star to star for years, with each near-miss promising a different film. By the time Eastwood committed, he had an advantage none of the others had: age, which made the agent's regret feel earned. He also came in with full creative control, meaning the next big decision who would direct was his alone. Number 4. The director Clint rescued from a flop. I was a little intimidated, I'll admit that, Wolfgang Petersen said of his early days on set. He wasn't an obvious choice. His American career had just stumbled with the little-noticed thriller Shattered. Eastwood, already attached to the project, watched it, saw real craft underneath, and personally pushed for Petersen. The gamble paid off for both. Over the next decade, Petersen directed Outbreak, Air Force One, and The Perfect Storm, becoming one of Hollywood's most dependable blockbuster directors. Number 5. Why Clint Turned It Down. Eastwood was 62 when the script reached him, and Frank Horrigan had been written as a man in his physical prime around 50. His first instinct was that the role belonged to a younger actor. Instead, the production leaned into the gap, giving Horrigan aching knees, a slower step, and a self-aware streak about his own creaking body. The timing was perfect. Eastwood was coming straight off Unforgiven's haunted, aging killer mood, which carried naturally into a Secret Service veteran outrunning his history, with Horrigan even joking about himself as a piano-playing heterosexual white male over the age of 50. Number 6. Rene Russo and the Age Gap Romance. With a leading man past 60 and a leading woman over 20 years younger, the film wrote the gap directly into the dialogue, letting the characters tease each other about it. Russo's agent Lily Raines was written as Horrigan's equal rather than his reward, sharp, professional, pushing back on his stubbornness rather than playing the decorative girlfriend common to the genre. Fresh off Lethal Weapon 3, Russo finally got real material to work with, and the relationship gave Horrigan something to lose in the present to balance the guilt he carried from the past. Number 7. The Secret Service Goes to Hollywood. That year the agency declined to cooperate with Dave and Guarding Tess, 2 friendlier White House portraits, but said yes to this film, whose hero is haunted by a failure and whose plot turns on the agency being outmaneuvered. The reason was accuracy. Agents wanted the public to see the real work, even with a flawed protagonist on screen. It was the Secret Service's first full cooperation with a feature film, sending a retired assistant director as technical advisor. There was also a practical hope that a popular thriller might do for recruiting what Top Gun did for naval aviation. Number 8. The world's first digital haircut. In one sequence, Eastwood stands in the 1963 Dallas crowd watching Kennedy's motorcade, decades younger than he actually was. Built from archival film and early digital compositing, the effect consumed a meaningful slice of the $40 million budget. The effects team lifted footage of young Eastwood from his early 1960s films and grafted his younger face into the historical plates, a trick one producer joked gave Clint the world's first digital haircut. The same basic technique would become famous a year later in Forrest Gump, though this film achieved it first, in a handful of frames most viewers never noticed. Number 9. Malkovich hated the running. Off-camera, John Malkovich was soft-spoken and bookish, nothing like his character, assassin Mitch Leary. His bet was that real dread comes from stillness rather than volume, and he played Leary as a man who never raises his voice, which is why the character still unsettles people decades later. It was his first true turn as a leading screen villain. The one thing he disliked was the physical side. Leary spends much of the film chasing and fleeing on foot, and Malkovich, by his own account, refused to train, simply setting down his cigarettes and running. Number 10. The 2000 Extra Parade Shoot. For 2 days, an entire city block was dressed as a presidential campaign stop, packed with a crowd thick enough to hide an assassin in plain sight. Managing 2,000 extras was closer to staging a real political rally than shooting a movie. Second unit crews captured texture from the actual 1992 campaign season to keep the backdrop authentic. The realism extended off the street too. On a Culver City soundstage, the crew built a $4 million interior of Air Force One detailed enough to pass for the real aircraft. Number 11. Ennio Morricone's Quiet Reunion. 3 decades earlier, a young Italian composer wrote the eerie whistles and gunshot percussion of Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, the films that made both his and Clint Eastwood's names. When Morricone took this assignment 30 years later, there was no nostalgic fanfare. He simply went to work, producing a score that sounds nothing like the desert. It runs on a tense electronic pulse through the chase sequences and opens into orchestral warmth for the Horgan Lily romance, aging better than most early 90s thriller scores by keeping Leone's melodic instinct underneath its modern texture. Number 12. Clint plays the piano himself. The hands at the keys in Horgan's bar scene are Eastwood's own, and some of that music came from his own pen. Music had shaped his life long before fame did. He recorded a cowboy and western album in 1959 during his Rawhide days and privately kept up piano and jazz for decades. He'd later score several of his own films as a director, including Mystic River. Even the Miles Davis track playing in Horgan's apartment was Eastwood's personal choice, a quiet detail revealing the character, without a line of dialogue. Number 13. Clint really hung from that ledge. At 62, Eastwood let himself dangle off a rooftop, harnessed but otherwise doing the stunt himself. Doubles handled only the actual falls. He also sprinted alongside the president's moving limousine himself. Most stars his age would have handed it all to a stuntman, and a few critics noted that a man in his early 60s asked a fair amount of audience belief. Number 14. The improvised gun and mouth moment. In one tense standoff, Leary has Horgan beaten and at his mercy. Nothing in the script called for what Malkovich did next. He improvised raising his own pistol and pressing the barrel into his mouth to mock the helpless agent. Petersen loved it and kept the take, and Eastwood reportedly laughed out loud watching from off-camera. The unscripted moment became the single image most people remember from the film, and it sits near the top of Malkovich's screen career. Number 15. The polymer gun fact check. In the 1980s, Washington feared an undetectable plastic gun that could pass through metal detectors, a fear real enough that Congress passed a 1988 law banning such weapons, even though the nightmare object barely existed. The film built Leary's homemade composite handguns straight out of that anxiety, smuggling unavoidable metal pieces through security disguised as a keychain and pen. In reality, A fully polymer firearm remains essentially fiction, since a live round needs metal to ignite and contain the explosion. Strip that out, and you're left holding a paperweight. Number 16. The Hotel with a Hall of Fame. The film's climactic shootout unfolds inside the Westin Bonaventure in downtown Los Angeles, its mirrored cylinders and glass elevators creating a vertiginous core that's since appeared in True Lies, Heat, and Interstellar. A few blocks away, the stately Biltmore stood in for the Denver Hotel's calmer scenes between Horrigan and Lily. The Bonaventure even mounted a plaque marking its role in the shootout, a permanent piece of the building's own story. Number 17. Phoning it in side by side. The wiretap phone calls between Horrigan and Leary feel like they were recorded separately, but according to Petersen, both actors were on set together, on the line in real time. That's why the calls crackle. Real pauses, real reactions. Their methods clashed productively. Eastwood liked loose, early takes, while Malkovich built his readings with surgical precision, and the friction produced some of the film's best scenes. Number 18. The editor who cut Lawrence of Arabia. N.V. Coates won an Oscar for the famous match-cut transition in Lawrence of Arabia 3 decades earlier. By the time she joined this production in her late 60s, shaping its relentless, clockwork pace earned her a 4th Academy Award nomination. She kept working into her 90s and eventually received an honorary Oscar. The same hands behind The Desert's most famous cut also behind this film's top political chase. Number 19. The President's Buried Endorsement. President Bill Clinton praised the film on Larry King Live, an unsolicited endorsement from the most powerful person in the country. Rather than build a campaign around it, nervous studio executives shelved it, unsure whether a presidential plug would draw audiences or drag the film into partisan crossfire during a charged political season. So it sat unused, a rare case of a movie hiding praise instead of shouting it from posters. Number 20. One of the first trailers posted online. In 1993, years before streaming was a common phrase, the marketing team uploaded a short preview to America Online, an experiment with a brand new medium. In its first week, the preview was downloaded by roughly 170 people total, one of the very first major studio film previews on the internet, with a turnout small enough to fit in a lecture hall. Number 21. The Summer of '93 Box Office Brawl. The film opened in 3rd place behind The Firm and Jurassic Park, then defied the usual pattern by climbing rather than fading, settling into 2nd place for weeks on strong word of mouth and a critical consensus that still sits around 96% positive. On a $40 million budget, it pulled in over $100 million domestically and roughly $187 million worldwide, a film that satisfied critics and accountants alike. Number 22. 3 Oscar nods and a famous snub. Malkovich was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, Maguire for Best Original Screenplay, and Coates for Film Editing, and all 3 lost to Tommy Lee Jones in The Fugitive, Jane Campion for The Piano, and Michael Kahn for Schindler's List. Of the 3, the Malkovich loss is the one audiences still argue about. His Leary became a performance other actors study, and the film picked up recognition elsewhere from the BAFTAs and Golden Globes. Number 23. The Villain Who Joined the Legends. Mitch Leary still turns up whenever people debate the most frightening movie characters, his calm, reasonable menace setting a template for the cerebral, soft-spoken killer that countless thrillers later copied. The film's success also helped open the door for the wave of smart, grown-up political thrillers that filled the rest of the 1990s. Number 24. Clint's 19-year directing streak begins. After this film, Eastwood settled into a pattern. Whenever he appeared in a feature, he was almost always directing it too, a streak that held until 2012's Trouble with the Curve. Watching Petersen run a lean, tightly controlled set may have confirmed something for Eastwood about how he wanted to make films, making this thriller the hinge point before nearly 2 decades of being entirely his own boss. More than 30 years later, In the Line of Fire remains one of the smartest cat-and-mouse thrillers of its decade. A 96% fresh film pairing a reinvented Eastwood against a villain many still believe was robbed at the Oscars. It revived a flatlining director and helped open the door for the grown-up political thrillers that followed. Which secret got you? The digital haircut, the improvised gun in the mouth, or a sitting president's endorsement vanishing into a studio drawer? Tell me in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.